The world had changed overnight. Once bustling cities now echoed with the groans of the undead, and the streets of Chicago were no exception. The skyline, once a symbol of hope and progress, now loomed over a city in chaos. In the heart of this chaos, a group of survivors huddled in the basement of an old library, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a single lantern. Among them was Jackson Miller, a former firefighter whose quick thinking had saved more than a few lives since the outbreak began. He glanced around at his companions: Olivia Brooks, a resourceful engineer with a knack for turning junk into weapons; Marcus Reed, a high school science teacher who had become the group's strategist; and Emily Carter, a college student whose calm under pressure belied her age. Each of them had lost something to the zombie hordes, but together, they had found a reason to keep fighting. The night was thick with tension. Outside, the shuffling of feet and guttural moans signaled the approach of another wave. Jackson pressed his ear to the door, counting the seconds between each sound. "They're getting closer," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Olivia tightened her grip on a makeshift spear fashioned from a broom handle and a kitchen knife. "We can't keep hiding," she said, her eyes darting to the boarded-up windows. "Sooner or later, they'll break through." Marcus nodded, his mind already racing through possible escape routes. "We need a distraction," he said, "something big enough to draw them away from the building." Emily, who had been quietly sketching on a scrap of paper, looked up. "What if we use the fire alarm system?" she suggested. "If we can get it working, the noise might lure them to the other side of the block." Jackson's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant," he said. "Olivia, can you rig it?" Olivia nodded, already gathering her tools. As the group moved through the darkened corridors, every creak and groan of the old building set their nerves on edge. They reached the maintenance room, where Olivia set to work on the alarm panel. Marcus kept watch at the door, his heart pounding in his chest. Emily handed Jackson a map of the neighborhood she had drawn from memory. "If we can make it to the river, we might be able to lose them in the fog," she said. Jackson studied the map, tracing their potential route with his finger. "It's risky," he admitted, "but it's better than waiting here to die." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from upstairs. The zombies had found a way in. "Hurry, Olivia," Marcus urged, his voice trembling. Olivia's hands flew over the wires, her brow furrowed in concentration. With a final twist, she connected the last wire, and the fire alarm blared to life, its shrill wail cutting through the night. The effect was immediate. The zombies, drawn by the noise, began to shuffle away from the basement entrance, their moans growing fainter as they moved toward the source of the sound. "Now's our chance," Jackson said, leading the group up the stairs and out into the alley behind the library. The city was a maze of abandoned cars and debris, but Emily's map guided them through the chaos. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows and avoiding the main streets. Every so often, they would hear the distant wail of the alarm, a reminder of the danger that still lurked nearby. As they neared the river, the group encountered their first real obstacle, a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. "We can't go back," Olivia said, her voice resolute. Marcus scanned the area, his eyes landing on a stack of wooden pallets nearby. "We can use those to climb over," he suggested. Working together, they stacked the pallets against the fence, creating a makeshift ladder. Jackson went first, his strong arms pulling him up and over the barrier. He reached down to help the others, his heart racing as the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Emily was the last to climb, her hands shaking as she gripped the wire. Just as she swung her leg over the top, a zombie lunged from the shadows, its fingers brushing her ankle. Jackson grabbed her arm, yanking her to safety as the creature snarled below. Breathless but unharmed, the group made their way to the riverbank. The fog was thick, swirling around them like a living thing. "We need to find a way across," Marcus said, peering into the gloom. Olivia spotted an old rowboat half submerged in the mud. "That'll do," she said, wading into the water to pull it free. Together, they pushed the boat into the river, climbing aboard as the first rays of dawn began to pierce the fog. As they drifted downstream, the city receded behind them, its skyline shrouded in mist. For the first time in days, the group allowed themselves to hope. They had survived the night, but they knew the fight was far from over. Ahead of them lay new dangers, but also new opportunities. As the boat glided silently through the water, Jackson looked at his companions and smiled. "We're not just surviving," he said. "We're fighting back." And with that, the survivors set their sights on the future, determined to reclaim their world from the jaws of the undead. The river carried the survivors away from the city's heart, but the sense of safety was fleeting. The fog thickened, muffling the sounds of the city and cloaking the banks in a ghostly shroud. Jackson kept a steady hand on the oar, his eyes scanning the water for any sign of movement. Olivia bailed water from the leaky rowboat with a cracked plastic cup, her mind racing with ideas for how they could reinforce it if they found supplies. Marcus, ever the planner, studied Emily's map, trying to pinpoint their location by the shape of the shoreline and the faint outlines of bridges overhead. Emily, meanwhile, kept watch behind them, her nerves on edge as she listened for the telltale splash of something, or someone, following. As the sun rose higher, the fog began to lift, revealing a stretch of riverbank overgrown with weeds and wildflowers. In the distance, a cluster of abandoned houseboats bobbed gently in the current. "We should check those out," Marcus suggested, pointing. "There might be supplies, or at least a place to rest." Jackson nodded, steering the boat toward the largest of the houseboats. As they drew closer, Olivia spotted a faded American flag fluttering from the roof. "Someone was here recently," she whispered. The group approached cautiously, weapons at the ready. Jackson was the first to board, his boots thudding softly on the weathered deck. He signaled the others to follow, and together they crept inside. The interior was cluttered but empty, save for a few scattered cans of food and a battered radio. Olivia's eyes lit up as she examined the radio. "If I can get this working, we might be able to contact other survivors," she said, already tinkering with the wires. Marcus rummaged through the cupboards, finding a box of old fireworks. "These could come in handy," he said, grinning. Emily, meanwhile, found a stash of fishing gear and a half-empty first aid kit. "We're luckier than I thought," she said, relief in her voice. Suddenly, a loud thump echoed from the roof. The group froze, hearts pounding. Jackson motioned for silence, creeping up the narrow stairs to investigate. He pushed open the hatch and peered outside. A lone zombie, its clothes tattered and face half missing, was tangled in the flagpole, its arms flailing as it tried to free itself. Jackson dispatched it quickly, but the commotion had drawn attention. From the riverbank, more zombies began to emerge, drawn by the noise and the scent of living flesh. Thinking fast, Marcus grabbed the box of fireworks. "Let's give them a show," he said, racing to the back deck. Olivia helped him set up the fireworks, aiming them toward the far side of the river. With a flick of a lighter, the first rocket shot into the sky, exploding in a shower of color and sound. The zombies, confused and distracted, turned away from the houseboat, lurching toward the noise and light. The group watched as the undead stumbled into the water, their groans drowned out by the crackle of fireworks. With the immediate threat diverted, the survivors regrouped inside. Olivia managed to get the radio working, static crackling through the speaker. After a few tense minutes, a voice broke through the noise. "This is Fort Lincoln. If you can hear this, we have shelter and supplies. Head north along the river. Avoid the main roads. Repeat, avoid the main roads." The message repeated, and the group exchanged hopeful glances. "That's our next move," Jackson said, determination in his voice. They spent the rest of the day fortifying the houseboat, patching leaks and setting up makeshift barricades. As night fell, they took turns keeping watch, the memory of the fireworks still fresh in their minds. For the first time since the outbreak, they had a plan, and a destination. But as the river flowed silently past, none of them could shake the feeling that the real challenges were yet to come. The undead were relentless, and the world was full of desperate survivors willing to do anything to stay alive. But Jackson, Olivia, Marcus, and Emily were ready. They had each other, their wits, and a growing arsenal of creative tricks. And as the stars blinked overhead, they vowed to fight back, no matter what the night might bring. The next morning dawned gray and humid, the river shrouded in a low mist that clung to the water like a secret. Jackson was the first to wake, his instincts honed by weeks of danger. He checked the perimeter of the houseboat, making sure their makeshift barricades were still intact. Olivia was already up, fiddling with the radio, hoping for another message from Fort Lincoln. Marcus and Emily emerged from their restless sleep, stretching and rubbing their eyes, the exhaustion of survival etched into their faces. They ate a meager breakfast of canned beans and crackers, their conversation hushed and focused. "We need to move soon," Marcus said, glancing at the map. "If we follow the river north, we'll avoid the worst of the city, but we'll have to pass through the old industrial district. That place was bad even before the outbreak." Jackson nodded, his jaw set. "We stick together. No heroics. If we see trouble, we find another way." Olivia packed up the radio and the remaining fireworks, while Emily secured the fishing gear and first aid kit. They pushed off from the houseboat, the current carrying them slowly north. The city faded behind them, replaced by the looming skeletons of abandoned factories and warehouses. The silence was eerie, broken only by the occasional splash of a fish or the distant, mournful groan of a zombie trapped somewhere in the ruins. As they drifted past a rusted water tower, Emily spotted movement on the shore. "Look," she whispered, pointing. A group of survivors, ragged and desperate, were scavenging near an overturned delivery truck. Jackson signaled for silence, but it was too late. One of the scavengers spotted the boat and shouted, waving his arms. The group tensed, unsure if these strangers were friend or foe. The scavengers began to run toward the riverbank, their intentions unclear. Olivia quickly lit a small firework and launched it into the air, the shriek and burst of color startling the scavengers and drawing the attention of a nearby horde of zombies. The scavengers scattered, some fleeing into the ruins, others diving into the river. The zombies, drawn by the noise, shambled after them, leaving the boat and its passengers unnoticed. Jackson steered the boat away from the chaos, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "That was close," Marcus muttered, his eyes wide. "We can't count on luck like that every time." Olivia nodded, her face pale. "We need to be smarter. Use what we have, but only when we have to." As the sun climbed higher, the group navigated a narrow channel lined with abandoned barges. The water was choked with debris, forcing them to use the oars to push their way through. Suddenly, the boat lurched, caught on something beneath the surface. Emily peered over the side and gasped. "It's a net," she said. "Someone set a trap." Before they could react, a figure appeared on the deck of a nearby barge, a rifle slung over his shoulder. "Don't move," he shouted. "Who are you?" Jackson raised his hands, trying to appear non-threatening. "We're just passing through," he called back. "We don't want any trouble." The man studied them for a moment, then lowered his rifle. "You're lucky," he said. "Most folks who come this way aren't so polite." He introduced himself as Hank Lawson, a former riverboat captain who had turned his barge into a floating fortress. He offered them a deal, help him clear out a nest of zombies in the lower decks, and he'd let them go free, and even share some supplies. The group exchanged wary glances, but they knew they had little choice. Armed with makeshift weapons and Hank's guidance, they descended into the dark, fetid hold of the barge. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the groans of the undead echoed off the metal walls. Working together, they used their creativity to outsmart the zombies. Olivia rigged a tripwire using fishing line and empty cans, while Marcus lured the zombies into a trap with a trail of canned food. Jackson and Hank finished off the stragglers, their teamwork swift and efficient. When the last zombie fell, Hank clapped Jackson on the back. "You folks are tougher than you look," he said, grinning. True to his word, he gave them a crate of bottled water, a box of batteries, and a handful of flares. As they pushed off from the barge, the group felt a renewed sense of hope. They had faced danger and survived, not just with brute force, but with ingenuity and trust. The river carried them onward, the promise of Fort Lincoln growing ever closer, but the memory of the day's challenges lingered. They knew the road ahead would only get harder, but together, they were ready for whatever came next. The river's current grew stronger as the survivors pressed north, the landscape shifting from industrial decay to tangled woods and overgrown parks. The air was thick with the scent of summer, but every rustle in the underbrush kept the group on edge. Jackson kept a watchful eye on the banks, while Olivia tinkered with the radio, hoping for another message from Fort Lincoln. Marcus, ever the strategist, studied the map and marked their progress, while Emily scanned the tree-line for movement, her nerves taut as a wire. By midday, the group spotted a collapsed bridge ahead, its twisted metal jutting out of the water like the bones of some ancient beast. The river narrowed here, forcing them to steer closer to shore. As they approached, a sudden commotion erupted from the trees. A pack of zombies, drawn by the sound of the boat scraping against debris, stumbled out onto the muddy bank. Jackson's heart pounded as he counted at least a dozen, their eyes fixed hungrily on the survivors. Thinking quickly, Marcus grabbed one of the flares Hank had given them. "We can use the current," he said, lighting the flare and tossing it upstream. The bright, sputtering light and acrid smoke caught the zombies' attention, and they turned, lurching after the distraction. Olivia, seizing the moment, used a length of rope to anchor the boat to a submerged tree, keeping them from drifting into the horde's path. Emily, meanwhile, spotted a narrow trail leading away from the riverbank. "If we move now, we can get around them," she whispered. The group abandoned the boat, grabbing only what they could carry, and slipped into the woods. The trail was overgrown and treacherous, but it offered cover from the zombies now clustered around the dying flare. As they moved deeper into the forest, the sounds of the river faded, replaced by the chirping of birds and the distant groans of the undead. Olivia led the way, her engineering mind quickly spotting natural traps, fallen logs, thorny brambles, and muddy pits, that could be used to their advantage. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. The group froze, listening as the cry echoed through the trees. Without hesitation, Jackson motioned for silence and crept toward the sound, the others close behind. They found a young boy, no older than 10, trapped in a hunter's snare, his ankle twisted and bleeding. A pair of zombies shambled toward him, their jaws snapping hungrily. Jackson and Marcus rushed forward, dispatching the zombies with swift, silent blows. Olivia knelt beside the boy, quickly freeing him from the snare and bandaging his wound with strips from her shirt. The boy, whose name was Tyler, explained through tears that he'd been separated from his family when their camp was overrun. He'd been hiding in the woods for days, surviving on berries and rainwater. Emily comforted him, promising they'd help him find his family if they could. With Tyler in tow, the group pressed on, moving cautiously through the forest. Olivia, inspired by the natural traps she'd seen, began setting up simple alarms using fishing line and empty cans, creating a perimeter around their makeshift camp for the night. As darkness fell, the group huddled around a small, smokeless fire. Tyler, exhausted, fell asleep with his head in Emily's lap. Jackson kept watch, his mind racing with plans for the next day. Olivia and Marcus whispered quietly, discussing ways to use the environment to their advantage. "We're outnumbered, but not outsmarted," Olivia said, her eyes shining with determination. "If we keep thinking ahead, we can stay one step ahead of them." That night, the alarms Olivia set up saved their lives. A small group of zombies, drawn by the scent of the fire, stumbled into the cans, sending up a clatter that woke the group instantly. Jackson and Marcus quickly dispatched the intruders, while Olivia and Emily kept Tyler safe. As dawn broke, the survivors packed up their camp, their spirits bolstered by their success. They had faced the darkness and survived, not just with weapons, but with creativity and teamwork. The road to Fort Lincoln was still long and dangerous, but with every challenge, the group grew stronger, and more determined to fight back against the undead tide. The morning sun filtered through the dense canopy, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor as the group pressed forward. Tyler limped but insisted on walking, his determination earning him a place in the tight-knit circle of survivors. Olivia kept a close eye on him, occasionally adjusting the makeshift splint she'd fashioned from branches and duct tape. The woods were eerily quiet, the usual sounds of wildlife replaced by the distant, ever-present groans of the undead. Marcus led the way, using a stick to test the ground ahead for hidden snares or unstable earth, while Jackson brought up the rear, his senses alert for any sign of pursuit. As they moved deeper into the forest, the trees began to thin, revealing the crumbling remains of an old amusement park. Rusted rides and faded signs loomed out of the undergrowth, their cheerful colors now muted by time and decay. "We should check for supplies," Marcus suggested, eyeing the ticket booth and concession stands. "Places like this sometimes have first aid kits or bottled water." Jackson agreed, but insisted they move carefully. "We don't know what's hiding in there," he warned, gripping his crowbar tightly. The group split into pairs, Jackson with Marcus, Olivia with Emily and Tyler, each moving cautiously through the overgrown park. Olivia's group headed for the concession stands, where she quickly found a stash of bottled water and a box of unopened candy bars. Emily, meanwhile, discovered a first aid kit beneath a pile of debris, its contents mostly intact. Tyler's eyes lit up at the sight of the candy, and for a brief moment, the horrors of the world seemed to fade. Jackson and Marcus explored the maintenance shed, where they found a stash of old fireworks and a canister of propane. "We could use these to set a trap if we need to," Marcus said, already envisioning ways to turn the park's attractions into defenses. As they regrouped near the carousel, a sudden noise made everyone freeze, a metallic clang, followed by the unmistakable shuffle of feet. Zombies, drawn by the scent of humans and the sound of movement, began to emerge from the shadows, their numbers growing with every passing second. Thinking fast, Olivia and Marcus sprang into action. Olivia rigged the propane canister to a bumper car, using duct tape and a length of fuse from the fireworks. Marcus lured the zombies toward the ride, shouting and waving his arms. As the undead closed in, Olivia lit the fuse and pushed the bumper car into the horde. The resulting explosion sent a shockwave through the park, scattering zombies and debris in all directions. The survivors used the chaos to their advantage, darting through the maze of rides and booths, picking off stragglers with makeshift weapons. Tyler, despite his injury, proved invaluable. His small size allowed him to slip through gaps in the fence and unlock gates for the others. Emily covered him, her aim steady as she dispatched any zombies that got too close. Jackson and Marcus worked together to barricade the entrance to the park, buying the group precious time to regroup and catch their breath. When the dust settled, the survivors found themselves in control of the amusement park, at least for the moment. They quickly set about fortifying their position, using the rides and attractions as barriers and traps. Olivia rewired the park's loudspeakers, setting up a system that could broadcast noise to lure zombies away from their camp. Marcus mapped out escape routes and potential choke points, while Emily and Tyler scavenged for more supplies. As night fell, the group gathered atop the Ferris wheel, watching the sun set over the ruined landscape. For the first time in days, they felt a sense of accomplishment, a small victory in a world gone mad. Jackson looked at his companions, pride shining in his eyes. "We're not just surviving," he said quietly. "We're turning the world's chaos into our advantage." The others nodded, their resolve strengthened by the day's success. The fight was far from over, but as the stars blinked to life above the abandoned park, the survivors knew they were ready for whatever came next. The amusement park became a temporary fortress, its twisted metal and faded colors transformed into a stronghold of hope. The survivors spent the next day reinforcing their defenses, using everything the park had to offer. Olivia rewired the bumper cars to create a perimeter alarm, so any movement near the entrance would send a jolt of electricity through the metal fence, alerting the group. Marcus and Jackson worked together to set up a series of traps using the park's supplies, tripwires strung with cans, nets fashioned from old safety harnesses, and even a makeshift catapult built from the remains of a broken teacup ride. Emily and Tyler, meanwhile, scouted the surrounding woods for signs of other survivors or threats, always returning before dusk. As the sun dipped low, the group gathered in the shadow of the Ferris wheel to plan their next move. Olivia had managed to boost the radio signal using parts from the park's sound system, and that evening, a new message crackled through the static. Fort Lincoln is under siege. All survivors, proceed with caution. Trust no one. Repeat, trust no one. The message sent a chill through the group. If Fort Lincoln falls, we'll have nowhere to go, Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Jackson put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We're not giving up. We'll get there, and we'll help however we can. That night, the park's alarms blared, jolting everyone awake. A group of desperate survivors had stumbled upon the park, their shouts echoing through the darkness. Please. Let us in. They're right behind us, one of them cried. Jackson hesitated, torn between caution and compassion. Marcus peered through a gap in the barricade and saw a family, 2 parents and a teenage girl, frantically waving, with a horde of zombies closing in fast. We can't leave them out there, Marcus said, urgency in his voice. Olivia quickly activated the loudspeakers, blasting carnival music from the far side of the park to draw the zombies away. Jackson and Marcus rushed to open a small gate, pulling the family inside just as the first zombies reached the fence. The electric perimeter sparked and sizzled, repelling the undead long enough for the group to reseal the entrance. The newcomers collapsed in relief, tears streaming down their faces. Thank you, the mother gasped. We thought we were done for. The survivors welcomed the new arrivals, sharing food and water as they listened to their story. The family, the Harrisons, had been traveling for days after their own camp was overrun. They'd heard the same radio message about Fort Lincoln and were trying to reach it, just like Jackson's group. The two groups quickly bonded, sharing information and strategies. Olivia showed the Harrisons how to help with the traps, while Emily and the teenage girl, Madison, kept watch from the Ferris wheel's highest car, scanning the horizon for movement. As dawn approached, the group realized the park could not hold forever. The noise and lights would eventually draw more zombies, and perhaps less friendly survivors. Jackson called everyone together. We've got to move at first light. We'll take what we can carry and head north, sticking to the woods. If Fort Lincoln is in trouble, they'll need every able hand they can get. The survivors packed quickly, taking only what was essential: food, water, medical supplies, and the most effective of their homemade weapons. Olivia left the loudspeakers set to a timer, so the park would erupt in noise after they left, hopefully drawing any nearby zombies away from their trail. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the group slipped out of the amusement park, their numbers now doubled, their resolve stronger than ever. They moved quietly through the trees, the memory of the park's bright lights and laughter lingering behind them like a ghost. Every step brought them closer to Fort Lincoln, and to whatever new dangers awaited. But as they walked, Jackson looked at his companions, old and new, and felt a surge of hope. They had turned a place of forgotten joy into a fortress, saved lives, and outsmarted the undead. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, with courage, creativity, and the unbreakable will to survive. The journey north was grueling. The group moved in silence, every sense alert as they navigated the dense woods and overgrown trails. The Harrisons proved to be quick learners. Madison, the teenage girl, was especially sharp, picking up Olivia's tricks for setting alarms and spotting danger. Tyler, though still limping, kept pace, his spirit buoyed by the presence of new friends. Jackson led the way, his firefighters' instincts guiding them around hazards, while Marcus and Olivia took turns scouting ahead. Emily and Mrs. Harrison kept the younger ones close, their eyes always scanning the shadows. By midday, the group reached the outskirts of a small, abandoned town. The streets were eerily quiet, the windows of the old shops and houses boarded up or shattered. "We need to cross here to reach the river again," Marcus whispered, consulting the map. "If we cut through the hardware store, we can avoid the main road." Jackson nodded, signaling for everyone to stay close. They slipped through a broken side door, the smell of dust and rust filling the air. Inside, Olivia's eyes lit up at the sight of tools and supplies. "Grab what you can carry," she urged, quickly filling her backpack with batteries, rope, and a sturdy hatchet. Suddenly, a crash echoed from the back of the store. The group froze as a figure stumbled into view, a lone zombie, its clothes tattered and face smeared with dirt. Jackson dispatched it quietly, but the noise had drawn attention. More zombies began to appear outside, their moans growing louder as they pressed against the glass. "We need a distraction," Marcus said, scanning the shelves. Madison spotted a display of paint cans and fireworks left over from the 4th of July. "We can make a smoke bomb," she suggested, her eyes bright with excitement. Working quickly, Olivia and Madison rigged the paint cans with firework fuses, creating a makeshift smoke bomb. Jackson and Marcus pried open a back window, and Emily tossed the device into the alley. Within seconds, thick, colorful smoke billowed out, obscuring the group's escape as the zombies shuffled toward the commotion. The survivors slipped out the front, moving swiftly through the swirling haze and into the next street. As they neared the river, the group heard the distant crackle of gunfire. "That's coming from Fort Lincoln," Mr. Harrison said, his face grim. They hurried toward the sound, hearts pounding. The riverbank was crowded with desperate survivors, all trying to reach the safety of the fort's high walls. But the gates were closed, and a line of armed guards stood atop the barricade, firing at the approaching horde. "We have to help them," Jackson said, determination in his voice. Olivia quickly assessed the situation. "If we can get to that construction site, we can use the equipment to create a barrier," she said, pointing to a half-finished building nearby. The group raced across the open ground, dodging zombies and weaving through panicked crowds. At the site, Marcus and Mr. Harrison started a bulldozer, while Olivia and Madison used chains and boards to reinforce the entrance. Emily and Mrs. Harrison covered them, picking off zombies that got too close. With a roar, the bulldozer plowed through the horde, creating a path for survivors to reach the fort's gates. The guards, seeing the opportunity, opened the gates just enough to let people through. Jackson led the charge, guiding his group and as many others as he could toward safety. The chaos was overwhelming, but the survivors' creativity and teamwork turned the tide. As the last of the crowd squeezed through the gates, the guards slammed them shut, and the horde crashed against the walls, unable to break through. Inside the fort, the survivors collapsed in exhaustion, their bodies bruised but their spirits unbroken. They had made it, against all odds, they had reached Fort Lincoln. But as they looked around at the battered faces of the other survivors, they knew the fight was far from over. The fort was under siege, supplies were running low, and trust was in short supply. Yet, in that moment, Jackson and his group felt a flicker of hope. They had survived not just with strength, but with ingenuity, compassion, and the courage to fight back. And as night fell over Fort Lincoln, they prepared for the next battle, ready to defend their new home with every creative trick they had left. Absolutely. Here is part 8, the conclusion of your story, filled with suspense, hope, and the creative spirit of survival. The first night inside Fort Lincoln was restless. The survivors huddled together in a makeshift barracks, the distant groans of zombies echoing beyond the walls. Jackson barely slept, his mind racing with plans and worries. At dawn, the fort's leader, Captain Douglas, called a meeting in the central yard. He was a grizzled veteran with sharp eyes and a commanding presence. "We're low on food, ammo, and trust," he announced, his voice carrying over the weary crowd. "But we're not out of hope. If anyone has ideas, now's the time. Jackson stepped forward, flanked by Olivia, Marcus, Emily, and the Harrisons. "We've survived this long by thinking outside the box," he said. "We can help." Olivia explained how they'd used fireworks, alarms, and traps to outsmart the undead. Marcus described the smoke bombs and makeshift barriers. Madison, her confidence growing, shared her idea for using the fort's old irrigation system to create a moat of muddy water, slowing zombies and making them easier targets. Captain Douglas listened, then nodded. "Let's get to work." The fort buzzed with activity. Olivia and Madison led a team to rig the irrigation pipes, flooding the ground outside the walls. Marcus and Mr. Harrison organized survivors to build new barricades from scrap metal and abandoned vehicles. Emily and Mrs. Harrison set up a first aid station, treating wounds and boosting morale. Jackson worked with the guards, teaching them how to use noise and light to lure zombies into traps. Even Tyler found a role, helping Olivia set up tripwires and alarms along the perimeter. As the sun set, the horde outside grew restless, drawn by the scent of so many people in one place. The first wave hit just after dark. Zombies slogged through the muddy moat, slowed and slipping, easy targets for the defenders on the wall. When a section of the barricade began to buckle, Marcus and Jackson used a flare to draw the undead toward a trap, a pit lined with sharpened stakes, camouflaged with debris. The plan worked perfectly, thinning the horde and buying the fort precious time. Inside, the survivors worked together like a well-oiled machine. Olivia's alarms gave early warning of breaches, and Madison's quick thinking kept the irrigation system running even when a pipe burst. Emily and Mrs. Harrison moved among the defenders, offering water and encouragement. Tyler, perched atop a lookout tower, spotted a group of survivors trapped outside the walls. Without hesitation, Jackson led a rescue team, using fireworks to distract the zombies and clear a path. The rescued survivors brought news of other groups nearby, sparking hope that more could be saved. By dawn, the worst of the attack was over. The fort's walls held, and the survivors had not only defended their home but also rescued others. Captain Douglas gathered everyone in the yard, pride shining in his eyes. "We did more than survive last night," he said. "We fought back. We used our heads, our hearts, and our courage. That's how we'll win." As the days passed, Fort Lincoln transformed. The survivors' creative defenses became legendary, inspiring others to try new tactics. The muddy moat, the traps, the alarms, and the teamwork turned the fort into a beacon of hope in a world overrun by darkness. Jackson, Olivia, Marcus, Emily, Tyler, and the Harrisons became leaders, teaching others how to fight smart, not just hard. One evening, as the sun set over the battered but unbroken fort, Jackson stood atop the wall, looking out at the world beyond. The undead still roamed, and the future was uncertain, but for the first time, he felt something stronger than fear. He felt hope. Humanity wasn't just surviving. They were fighting back, one creative idea at a time. And as long as they stood together, there was nothing the living couldn't overcome.